Hello, everybody, and welcome to UXDX Online. We're kicking off our USA series here with looking at kind of UX processes, and we've got some great speakers lined up for you today. But before we jump into that, I wanted to give a very quick introduction to what we do at UXDX and what we're trying to achieve. So our mission is to help people shift or help companies shift from building software in waterfall projects to more autonomous, empowered product teams. And why we do that is because we believe it's a more efficient, effective, and sustainable way of working. But one thing that we kind of like to flag is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So we don't want to be kind of product team maximalists, because we understand that that isn't always the best solution. So for an example, if you are working in a very low change environment, then it makes perfect sense. Don't have a constant team sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for changes. Build your team when you need it. Do a waterfall project because they don't have much context about the business or the customer, and then disband the team at the end. But what we're seeing is that most people are working in more of a kind of rapid, high iteration environment where kind of the context of what you're working on, the speed of changes that you need to do, they're just ever increasing. And in those contexts, in that context, that's when a cross-functional product team is more efficient. Now, it's great to say, let's just swap over to work in product teams, but that comes with a lot of challenges as well. And one of the biggest ones is that in a waterfall project, you have your kind of dedicated specialists. So you'll have your interaction designer, your UX researcher, your UI designer, your your front-end developers, your back-end developers, your database engineers, your data engineers, your AI, your QA, all of these kind of specialities. And there can be over 20 of them when I counted once, of people that were kind of touched from start to finish on a project. But if you move to a product team, what you're looking at there is you're looking at the needing to reduce that to a maximum of around 8 people. So you have to kind of get all of that skill set that those 20 people had into 8. And that's where the concept of T-shaped skills come along, where you have a deep speciality in one area, but you have a broad range of understanding of all of the other roles that are happening. So that's why at UXDX, we always kind of ask everybody to join in our conferences. So we have kind of product managers, UX researchers, designers, developers, all coming together so that they can start developing those T-shaped skills. So hopefully in the audience out there today, we have a broad mix as well. The other thing then is that we always ask people, try to give some examples while you're doing it. So it's great to have a talk that's all about the theory of what can work, but theory is great until you have to start putting it into practice, and that's where you find the real challenges. So it's always good when people can share the challenges that they've faced and how they've overcome them as well. And then finally, if you have any questions, because as I listen to all these great talks that we're about to come across as well, I always have questions. So I'm always eager to ask them and figure out, dive a little bit deeper into the context and understand why and how certain things are working. So please do ask your questions. We'll collate them and share them with the speakers, because we should have a few minutes after each talk for a few questions. But if we do run out of time, we have the Ask the Speakers channel on our Slack, which if you share your questions in there, we'll forward them to the speaker and they can answer them offline as well. So that's enough of an introduction from me. I'm not the reason why you're here. You're here to listen from our great speakers today. So what we're going to start off with today is Personas for Insights by Wilma Lamb, who is a Design Strategy Director at Substantial. So over to you, Wilma, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Rory. Very excited to be here today. Yeah, so thank you everyone out there for joining this talk. This talk is called Personas Deconstructed, Taking Apart User Assumptions to Craft Better Insights. And just a little bit about me. So I'm Wilma Lamb, Design Strategy Director at Substantial. And my background focuses on the intersection of design, technology, and business innovation, aiming to build new products and services using human-centered design and equity-centered practices. I'm a host of the Optimistic Design podcast, which just finished its 2nd season. And then a little bit about Substantial. So Substantial was founded in 2006. We're a studio delivering design research and strategy, product design, and full stack development with our distributed team of researchers, strategists, designers, and developers across North America. So diving into our topic today is common, I think, especially for designers, but also more largely product teams, to be asked to do research to uncover, what really are the user needs for the challenge at hand, and how do we define problem spaces and come up with solutions. So in experiences that my team has had, this can encompass being asked to create, personas, which is a tool which is used to capture an understanding of archetypes of users. So for example, we've had clients ask us, can you help us with personas that represent uninsured diabetes patients, or can you help us to create a frame that represents students that are struggling in school, or can you help us to create personas to help us understand, a new employee experience as part of our a larger product design project. So let's talk a little bit, for people who are not familiar, about what personas typically are, and more importantly, why our team now is really rethinking how we actually approach them. So most typically, user personas are conceptual representations created based on an amalgamation of user attributes of what we would consider typical users of a product or a service. That's shown here has an image, has associated demographics, and a user biography to give some background and flavor as to who this hypothetical user might be. It seeks to tie in this user's motivations, goals, and behaviors, which are going to be used to drive the needs that need to be addressed with the product or service that we're building. They're meant to provide reliable, realistic representations of key users to help shape service and product offerings. And in many cases can be a very useful tool if you have a very specific understanding of, what is the problem space at hand. We have a very clear definition of what kind of product or service we are building. But on the other hand, our team has also encountered that we would do design research followed by creating a persona framework that would follow the more typical method, where we've taken what we've heard from maybe dozens of end users and created these archetypes. But then when we go and we actually share it back with some of the end users that we've interviewed to validate and hear, their opinion of what we've created, we can hear back from users that, the details don't exactly feel true to what they said, or it doesn't fully capture the set of needs or complexities or contexts which they operate in. So what's happened when we try to use a framework like a more typical persona? So what's happened is that user personas definitely also have their limitations. So it really depends on what you're trying to do when you're doing design research to understand. Primarily, this kind of framework can become reductive, and it can be a static representation that looks at users at a fixed point in time and context. And furthermore, by showing a biography and demographics together with the goals and needs, it can lead to an incorrect assumption that actually those things are related. This is especially problematic when you're considering marginalized or underrepresented groups, as it can lead to stereotyping people's behaviors and needs. So if we look at the example here, the same one that I showed before, you could also look at this and incorrectly assume that people of this age group, salary, and job generally tend to exhibit these same behaviors, motivations, and goals. And that's going to drive the kind of product or service that you should be designing for them. What it doesn't fully account for is how their motivations, goals, behaviors, and needs are maybe context dependent. And that may depend on things that are not necessarily represented on this framework. So today, as our team's been reflecting on the need to, one, have something that we can bring to product teams to talk about, well, what are the needs of users and how do we define what our product or service can do? But there are two additional layers that we need to think about. So how do we move forward building flexible, nuanced tools, that capture these insights, but that also respect multiple contexts and spectrums of experience? And at the same time, how do we also ensure that these are still easy to use by focusing on the most relevant information? So what we've come up with kind of over the last year is a new approach to thinking about personas, what we're currently calling attribute set personas. And this centers on the idea of a persona representing a specific set of needs and experiences within a specific set of contexts. So this is not trying to capture who somebody is in all aspects of their life, but really looking specifically at a contextual lens. So we focus less on defining specific demographic segments or even psychographic segments, but rather on defining the parameters of a specific context in which we're creating a product or service, and how that leads to a set of needs or experiences which we can actually design a product or service against. So to help us as we started kind of rethinking what personas could be, we have reviewed a lot of our previous design research and projects across multiple industries, working with a variety of clients. And we're also looking at examples from the broader design industry. And out of this kind of audit, we really started to try to identify, well, what are the things that really drive user needs and experiences? And can there be a new framework that we could develop that might be different from what we would consider a more typical user persona kind of framework? And what emerged from these conversations and kind of reviewing projects were examples, the one that's shown on this slide, which is from a project that we did looking at education technology, where a student talks about, a specific context that shapes her needs and experiences, where she had shared with us, what I feel I need to do good in school changes. Do I like this class? Is the instructor good? Am I working a lot? Does it matter for my goals right now? There's a lot of different things. And this was consistent as we looked across industries in different contexts, the specific needs that were raised by end users vary greatly based on the specific context in which they are going to be using a product or a service. And what we identified kind of across different projects and industries is that there are four kind of general areas of influence that shape the needs and experiences of users. And these seemed pretty consistent from what we were seeing. And that was personal context, institutional system, situational journey, and mindset. So the first of these, personal context, has to do with how users' personal background, demographics, or previous experiences shape how they're approaching like the current context at hand. So for example, if we think about that educational example, we can consider, what year is a student in school? Do they have older siblings that might have gone through this school before? Are there additional learning needs that we need to consider that are important context for how they might be using, let's say, a piece of educational technology? The second aspect is institutional system. So going back to that educational example, in this case, we would be thinking about, is this student going to school in a public or a private environment? Is it a big school or a small school? What is their access to digital technology? Like, what are the kind of systemic influences that are going to shape how they're going to be using like whatever sort of product we're developing? And then the third area that we would consider is the actual journey of the user over time. So how different points in time lead to differing needs and experiences. So we might consider the difference of a student starting in like their freshman year, right, their first year of high school through their fourth year. But we can also consider the journey over the arc of the year from their first day of class to their last day of that term. And how are their needs and experiences distinct, and what might they be looking for in educational software that's going to change over the course of that journey? And then the fourth aspect is mindset. So what attitudes and beliefs are users bringing into the situation that we're solving for? And what is notable with mindsets is that it can also change based on the other three factors. So, a student that's in their first year or their first day of class might have a different perspective than a student that's on their last day of class or in their third year of school, for example, or if they've changed schools, like their mindset might be different. So how are we also accounting for that and understanding the needs and behaviors of end users? So as a starting framework, kind of building off of those four quadrants, what we try to do is then begin to shape, what are the attributes that come into play in each of these four areas? We pay attention in our research to, what are the personal contexts, the different kinds of systems, the different points in the journey, and different types of mindsets that we hear about as we're interviewing end users. And how are we using that to start to develop like an early understanding of the different flexible attributes that could be in play for a group of users? And so like most typically what we're trying to develop is a larger set of needs and experiences that in total the product team needs to consider. It's not that they necessarily need to design for every single attribute, but at least that they've considered each of these attributes, and then we're making a decision as a product team on like, okay, which of these attributes are going to be considered for this product or service, and which of them are maybe not as core to what we're solving to now. The most important thing here is really that there's a conscious decision about which attributes are going to be considered. So to give an example of how this actually might work with a specific project, in this case, like let's look at how we might approach a project related to maternal health experience to improve patient outcomes. So for example, like if we've been asked to create personas with the goal of understanding what is driving poor maternal mortality and maternity care outcomes in the United States, which is a multifaceted issue with many potential factors, we could use the attributes that personas framework we aim to capture the ecosystem of context and associated needs and gaps in patient experience that we might want to consider as we start moving forward with a project like this. So as a starting point, our team would typically do secondary research to understand the maternal health space, trends, as well as social listening to gain initial insight. This would often be followed with a series of interviews, probably several dozen, with pregnant people across different points in their pregnancy with a focus on understanding that end-to-end patient experience. To give additional context, we might also round out that research by speaking with, healthcare professionals, including midwives, nurses, doctors, administrators, and other specialists. And out of this research, our goal is to really start to shape, okay, what is this what is the personal context that may be at play in this environment? What are the institutional systems? So in this case, we're really talking about the healthcare system that's going to influence end user like needs, behaviors, and experiences. And then situationally over time, what are the distinct needs or experiences across that kind of patient's journey that might shape what a specific product or service needs to provide. And then lastly, how do those other three elements then shape different mindsets that end users might have? So in our initial synthesis for that work, we would start drafting what we think are a relevant set of attributes and then seek to validate these with user research, like where we would actually bring back people that we had initially interviewed to then look at like, well, here's some of the insights that we generated. Does a set of attributes feel right? And we would do that in co-creation sessions with people we'd interviewed earlier in the process. We'd be bringing them back. So in the example that we're showing here, we've captured what patients have shared about their personal context that might impact their pregnancy experience. So they talked about things related to their support outside of the healthcare system, previous parental experience, financial concerns, healthcare access concerns. So these might be all things that are like, their personal individual context is going to shape needs and experiences that they have within then the maternal health system that we're trying to solve for. At the institutional system level, we've categorized the experience based not on specifically like the type of hospital per se, but on the type of experience and the level of support that patients report to us that they're receiving. And so that's a range from, are they receiving like relationship-based care where they're really close to their healthcare providers and they feel like they're able to access all the information that they need to be able to make informed decisions, all the way to maybe a rating that is more reactive care where they don't feel like there's necessarily anyone in the healthcare system that's really being proactive about supporting them. And so there's a range in between where we're trying to understand how do changes in the system then change, how you need to support that individual patient so that they have the best outcome possible. And then for the situational journey, we're really looking at like major milestones over the course of pregnancy in this particular case, from initially trying to conceive all the way through, postpartum as kind of the major milestones. And then we would also consider additional events such as pregnancy loss or transfer of care during the pregnancy. And then lastly, we also captured, major mindsets that kind of stood out to us during the course of this research of thinking about, a range of what pregnant people report as the mindsets that they use as they approach their experience. So are they more experience oriented? Are they more knowledge oriented? Or are they really milestone oriented? They're trying to get to that next milestone in the journey. And so we start with like all of these as sort of flexible attributes. And then how we kind of capture the insight associated with each of these attributes is we start to draft actually an attribute card. And each of these cards would then describe, what is the attribute? Is there like a relevant end user quote that came out in the research that we think is useful for the product team to be aware of? And how do we describe, this experience or goal and specifically highlight needs that might need to be addressed with a product or service that we're designing for within these cards. And ultimately, like what the product team will have is like a set of all of these attribute cards that can then be put together to represent like a whole set of different kinds of personas that could be the end users of the product. So rather than boiling it down to a more typical archetype of 4 or 5, the cards allow for like a much greater flexibility. And then we would continue to iterate on these cards. So often what we do is we create the cards and then we actually will go back and like do validation research, bringing back end users, having them actually try using them. So we'll ask like, oh, we interviewed you earlier. We heard about your experience along with a bunch of other people. We've now generated these cards. Can you actually select the cards that you think are most applicable to you right now and talk us through whether you feel like these accurately represent the needs or experiences that you have related to a product or service that we're currently designing for. And what this really allows us to do is to get a lot more specific about what we need to design for with a product or service. So here's an example with someone. So like we had asked this individual to select cards that represented her early pregnancy experience and not the experience she had like right at this moment. And she had said, I chose limited personal support because it took time to figure out how my family and partner could help me. I selected increased maternal age because I'm over 35, and I was originally at a local birth center, but wasn't getting the information I wanted. So this gives us a chance to verify that actually the attributes that we've created in these cards that the product team will be designing against are like accurate, and they're seen as representing true user experiences. And we would do this exercise with a number of different users we'd interviewed earlier, at this point in the project, just to verify. And we would ask them to do this not only reflecting on like earlier experiences, but also their current experience, so that the team gets to understand, how are these attributes also changing over time. And we're using it ultimately to identify opportunities and gaps as we're developing product and services, to make sure that we haven't actually like inadvertently left behind like key contexts or key needs that would have otherwise been overlooked. And so here's an example of, we had asked this person to select cards representing their earlier pregnancy experience. We also asked them to do the same for their current pregnancy experience. And at this point, we're talking to them in their third trimester. So they're picking, different cards. They're talking about like different considerations that they have. And this process is really useful for our product teams, just to understand like the range of experience that a person may have. And I think overall, like what makes this framework really useful for our teams is like, rather than making assumptions about, a particular person or a set of personas and their needs or experiences, we're actually able to work with end users throughout this process and integrate the product team in how we're doing this kind of research to develop an integrated, flexible approach to defining what's most important as we head into actually developing different kinds of solutions. And it also helps us to uncover things that maybe we hadn't anticipated before, and maybe to foresee more things that could be really important to consider as we're designing a product or service. And so while the example that I just shared is for maternal health, we've definitely thought about and like use this application in other sorts of industries pretty effectively. And a lot of it just helps our team to really broaden our thinking about who are we really solving for, what are the wide variety of contexts and needs that need to be considered in a particular product or service development. And overall, if there's three kind of takeaways for this talk, I would ask you to kind of rethink the situation when you're asked to create personas, or even if you're asked to create like a set of insights that are supposed to represent all of your end users. So one, try looking at personas as a flexible spectrum of attributes rather than fixed representations that are always true. Number two, define the spectrum of attributes based on deeply understanding how they actually shape user needs and experiences. And how you do that is item three, which is you partner with end users to really define, develop, and refine attribute sets. So this is perhaps the most important, to ensure that these are accurate reflections of user needs and experiences, and to ensure that also your product team has like a clear understanding of what they're solving against, and that fully captures kind of intersectional contextual needs and experiences for the variety of end users that you may need to consider. So thank you so much for listening to this talk. If you'd like to connect with me or learn more about this work and approach, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, email our team, or visit substantial.com, where you can also find the Optimistic Design podcast. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Wilma. That was really, really interesting. It sings to my, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of personas for all of the reasons that you mentioned there about the kind of static context and generalizations and stereotypes. So I really did enjoy that. But I have a few questions, and there is time for some questions. So one thing that just jumped out at me as you were going through, and I'm sure you might have gotten this question before, have you much experience with jobs to be done, and where is the overlap or difference do you see between your kind of context maps, the cards and the context versus, like, let's say, coming up with a job to be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it also depends on the stage of work that a product team is at. So most commonly when we've used these attribute sets of persona, like attribute sets, we're doing it at a much earlier stage of product or service development, where maybe like the business case itself is not as clear. So you're talking about needs and experiences as a high level, I think jobs to be done to me come into play a lot more when the business case is a lot more clear of like, okay, we know what kind of product or service and we know where it's going to go and how we're going to sell it in. That being said, we've kind of been developing this framework over the last year. And so while right now the sets of cards we've created, they focus on, needs and experiences, I think I could also definitely see a case for a product team further along, like updating their cards to change it to be more about jobs to be done once it becomes a lot more clear what they're actually creating.
Yeah, great. No, I love that. And Bob Moesta uses jobs to be done a lot more on the sales side. So I get what you're saying about it's kind of more for further down the line. One thing that jumped out to me is, so the problem with personas is that they're stereotyping or generalizations that aren't necessarily true. But then when I looked at your example, and it was great, and I really thought that it was very immediately useful. I could look at this slide that you shared and learn a lot from it. But one thing that I thought was, okay, that early stage pregnancy, and one of the attributes was older mother, or I can't remember how you phrased it. But that's going to be very specific to that person, whereas other people in early stage pregnancy wouldn't have that. So how many of these contexts do you end up creating, and how do you avoid it becoming a context of one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot where we're looking at like, okay, like let's say we did 30 interviews, like how often did this issue come up? What you're trying to bubble up to the surface is like the most significant kind of like contextual factors. So in the case of pregnancy, at least in the US, actually your experience of the whole healthcare system when you're over 35, because that's considered a geriatric pregnancy, is actually different. Like the series of interventions that someone would experience and how doctors treat them is different. And so if you're noticing that in the interviews of like, oh, this set of people is talking about this kind of experience, then this set of people is talking about a different set of experience, then that's a context you want to capture. We would certainly see like other projects where, for example, age is never mentioned as a contextual factor. And so then it never bubbles up to the surface as something that we would capture.
Brilliant. And then, yeah, I guess just what did you end up with? So let's say you had 30. What do you try to reduce it down to? Or is there a golden number or anything? Or do you just kind of see what bubbles up?
Yeah. And so this is the part where it really depends. Like our team will assess based on what the product team needs, what we need to create. So we've done some projects where it was like ultimately, so we have this set of cards and we might have maybe for a specific team working on a specific product, we then might have them develop like, okay, here's 4 or 5 personas that we want to focus on based on these sets of cards. And the biggest thing here is team choice. It's that they can look at all the cards and they're making a conscious decision to be like, these cards are not a part of what we're focusing on, and these cards are. And what we're trying to check for there is that they haven't inadvertently left things out. If you're leaving things out, it's a conscious choice the team has made to be like, we can't solve for these issue, or these are just not core to our user base right now. The other thing that we've seen teams do now is actually, rather than creating a single persona, they look at the set of cards as a whole, and they're making a decision of like, okay, we're going to service, these specific types of users and these specific needs because our product can cover this. And then some of these other attributes are not going to be part of it because our product cannot solve for these issues. And I think that helps us with some of the loadedness traditionally of like, oh, this persona is an archetype of all these people. Now it's more just like, well, our user group as a whole has these attributes, and that's what we're solving for, rather than a hypothetical like individual person.
Great. I could keep asking you loads more questions. I found that talk really, really interesting. I loved your approach, and I love the visuals of how you kind of communicated it as well. So I think it's very powerful. So thank you very much, Wilma.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Great. So up next, we have Tyler Edwards, who's a web and UI designer at Pixo, and he will be talking about better design with humility, or more of you and less of me. So with that, there'll be less of me. Over to you, Tyler. Thanks.
Well done. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Yes, my name is Tyler Edwards. I am the senior designer at Pixo in Urbana, Illinois. So we're a software consultancy who specializes in creating websites and apps and systems that put people first, very simply said. It is an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you all today. So thank you so much for your willingness to have me and for your willingness to spend this time with us. This is wonderful. So today, yes, we're going to be talking about what I believe is the most critical attribute of an effective design process. And it's not better software, and it's not Scrum or Agile, and it's not a new kind of design system. And those are all great facets, but it's far more foundational than any tool or technique we could adopt. And it's humility. It's humility. And now you might hear that and think like, oh, okay, sure. Thank you. I was maybe looking for something a little new, a little more practical, but I guess this is fine. Okay. But hear me out. This topic grew out of an effort to define our own design process at Pixo. We wanted to answer the question of, how can we do our best work more consistently? What makes our process most impactful? And the deeper we dug into these questions, the more we uncovered this common thread that all of our best work that we had done on all of our projects, all of it has been directly connected to the amount of humility that we employed on the project. When we had shifted our mindset from being me-centered to others-centered, our work would radically improve. And I believe this is true for all of us, whether you're a UX designer or a visual designer or an engineer or a project manager or anyone else on a team like ours. Incorporating humility into your process is the key to doing your best work. So when we build our design process on a foundation of humility, when we elevate the needs and the perspectives and the gifts of others above our own, we will produce the kind of work that truly makes us proud. So here's what we're going to do with our time together this afternoon. We're going to start with an understanding of what I mean by humility and why it matters. Then we'll talk about how me-centered thinking has actually been hardwired into our professional lives from even a very young age. And then we'll follow up with a quick evaluation just to see how pervasive it is in our roles today. And then finally, I'll offer some practical suggestions for how you can introduce others-centered thinking into your own process, and we'll use our Pixo design process as a roadmap when we do that. So let's get started. Now, when we hear that word humility, I think many of us equate it with having maybe a low view of yourself, right? Like it may be considered humble to think little of your strengths or your position or even your value as a team member, but that's not quite right. You see, true humility, it's not a diminishing of your capabilities. It's actually a recognition of your inabilities. You do have many strengths. You are a worthy and equal member of your team. That's true. And at the same time, you are not the end all be all source of success, right? You're only a piece of the puzzle. If we're going to work in humility as professionals, as UX designers, as visual designers, as whomever, then we must see how dependent we truly are on the people around us. That's the heart of humility. It's acknowledging our great need. It is an all-encompassing focal shift from ourselves to the people around us, from being me-centered to others-centered. You're going to hear me talk about that a lot, being me-centered to others-centered. So do this with me. Think about your own team for a second. Think about them as a body. If UX is the bones and designers are the skin and engineers are the organs, then it would be pretty foolish of you, say the designer, to say, no thanks, body. I don't need your help. Of course you do. You're just a pile of skin without the rest of your team. And that may seem obvious, right? Of course I need my team. Like, I'm not a developer or a project manager. I'm a designer. I can't do what they do. I do what I do, right? But if we insist on doing what we do in a vacuum without inviting input and critique and collaboration, then we will inevitably sabotage the entire project. Me-centered design elevates the priority of your own contribution as it minimizes the work of everyone else. You'll come out of every project with great wireframes or great mock-ups, but and just a lousy product. And that's just your team. What about the people you're designing a product for? The end user, the audience. When we work out of a me-centered mindset, we completely cut the most critical voices out of the equation. We believe that our expertise is sufficient when they're the real experts, right? They are the ones who can offer the most valuable input from the very beginning. Wilma was just talking about this in her talk. They're the ones who will use your product long after you finish building it. And when we design without considering their needs, their experiences, and the overall impact our work may have on their lives, and we're gonna miss the mark every single time. So when I design out of a me-centered mindset, the truth is I'm only designing for me. And I've said this a lot in the past, but what I do as a visual designer, I'm painting pictures when I do this, and I'm painting pictures for the great gallery of my own design achievements. Now, I could care less about how positive of an impact it may have on the lives of others, or how I might lift up the talents of my team. I'm only concerned with what others think about me. And the fact is, we've been hardwired with a me-centered mindset from our youth. This is deeply ingrained in each of us. As a kid, because there I am as a kid, and I was at the center of the universe, right? I was the main character of the story. And when it came to the thoughts and the plans I had for my future, like many of you, I was consistently asked the question, like, well, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you going to accomplish? What kind of future will make you most happy? All aspects of life had me constantly preparing for the kind of career that would ultimately define and fulfill me. And that was equally true in college. I went to school for graphic design, where every project I worked on had me functioning as the only team member and the client and the audience. It was me. And it was always my vision from the beginning to the end. And so we work our whole young lives towards a career with this emphasis on me. Then all of a sudden, we get hired to work alongside others, being informed by others, creating things for others, asking questions of others. And it's truly incredibly jarring. And I'll tell you, my heart just aches when I consider all of the effort I poured into elevating and guarding my reputation as a professional designer over these past 15 years. So if we're going to effectively introduce humility into our own design process, we have to first acknowledge that me-centered thinking and how it pervades our own lives currently. We need to reckon with the influence of the me-centered world around us. So this is what we're going to do real quick. We're going to take a quick test to probe our own me-centered tendencies here. So I'm going to put these questions up on the screen, read them out loud to you to consider. There's just 4 A or B questions. And if you got some notes pulled up, maybe try and just jot down your answers, and we'll see how you fare in the end. So you ready? This is real quick. Let's do this together. So when working on, I say design mockups here, when you're working on wireframes, you're really working on anything. Do you invite people in to regularly critique your work, or do you wait until everything is just right before you share it with others? All right. Okay, next one. When researching a future project, do you speak with potential users to understand their needs? Or do you rely on your own experience and your own understanding for direction? Okay. Do you consider your client or the stakeholders to be an ally, someone to partner with, or someone who will most likely get in the way? Then when you receive critical feedback, do you take it as an opportunity to improve yourself and your work, or do you throw a fit and determine all of the reasons why they are wrong? All right. How do we do? Do we have more A's or more B's? Yeah. If you found yourself with more B answers, that's great. I mean, we're confronting some real, me-centered patterns there, but I'm so glad you chose to be honest with yourself. If you have all A's, then I'm afraid that you need to humble yourself and think again. I am joking, but I'm confident we're not all hitting the home runs here, right? I know I'm not. So Now that we've got a better understanding of how pervasive this me-centered thinking can be, how can we practically keep others at the center of our work as design professionals? So here's what we'll do with the rest of our time. We're going to walk through Pixo's own design process. And with each phase, I'll share some thoughts and some practices we typically utilize to help us keep others at the center of our work. Now, Pixo, our process consists of the 4Ds: discover, define, design, develop. Pretty simple. I'm sure you've got something like this as well. So we'll begin with discover. So at the very beginning of each project, our team works really hard to learn all that we can. Who's the client? What are their goals? How are they represented? How are they represented visually? Who's the audience? What are their needs? So on and so forth. We become students, asking every question we can, leaving no stone unturned. So how do we work to keep others at the center of that discovery phase? First, we direct all of those questions towards actual people. And not just any people, but the people at the heart of the project. Again, Wilma was just hitting at this, and I really loved what she had to share. But big picture, we'll schedule a kickoff meeting for the whole team to engage with the client and the stakeholders at large. We establish weekly meetings to continue our discussion and lay a foundation of trust. We make plans for each of those meetings to include some kind of exploratory activity like messaging card sorts and design inventories. We conduct interviews. We ask the client to clearly define the audience and direct us towards members of that audience that we can actually speak with. Now, as the designer, specifically as the visual designer, it is my immediate temptation to disengage from the discovery phase. Right? I'm just here to kick out mockups, right? And absolutely not. That's a me-centered mentality. Rather, we as designers must walk alongside our content strategists, our UX designers, our researchers as they do the hard work of research. We need to ask to participate in their interviews with audience members. Be an observer at each activity and listen intently to the conversations they're having. Here's my other me-centered tendency in the discovery phase. I'm quick to assume that my eye for design is far better than the client's. I can whip up something from my own imagination without their input, and it'll be right on target. Don't even worry about it. But that's absolutely untrue. I am just now entering this project where they've had a vision for this product for months, if not years. It's my job to help materialize what they already visualize. So we must conduct activities that help the client communicate their vision in a visual way. So one activity that we like to use is, we call it the gut test. So in this activity, we invite a diverse group of people from the organization to review 15 to 20 different examples of designs, say if it's a website, designs from around the web. And with each example, we ask our participants to answer the question, how accurately does this design represent your vision for the new website? So we'll send out an online survey with the images to gather their thoughts, and then we'll have this follow-up discussion with the entire group to review the results. And this is always such an eye-opening activity. I love it. It empowers the client to actually pair pictures with their thoughts. When I say that I want our website to be modern or bold or approachable, this is what I mean right here. So instead of assuming that I know what they mean, they can articulate their vision more precisely. All right, on the next phase here. This is what we call define. And this is a unique step in the process. It's less of a phase and it's more of a pivot point. When we define, our goal as designers is to synthesize and communicate all we've learned from our research. And then we want to set an initial course for the design itself. So how do we do that with an others-centered mindset? First, we make the time to share with the client all that we've learned with the discovery findings meeting. So it'd be easy to conduct our research and simply say like, okay, thanks, we'll take it from here. But how do we know that we're walking away with the right information? So when we share our findings with the client, we ensure that our research is accurate and it's complete. And this is a chance for the experts to call out any inconsistencies or blind spots in our understanding. Then the other facet of the phase is setting the course for design in collaboration with the client. It is our great temptation as designers to run off with just the first good idea we have and make it a reality, right? But if we head off in some direction that seems right to us alone, even if it's off by just a few degrees, we'll end up miles away from the client's vision, right? So we solve this problem at Pixo by using something we call design palettes. A design palette is just a collage of styles like colors and typography and buttons, and they serve eventually as the visual DNA for the entire product. And so this is very much derived from Samantha Warren's concept of style tiles, and really kind of the same thing, except just a cooler name, I guess. This is a fantastic tool for collaboration as well. As a designer, I develop 3 to 5 of these palettes. Then I work with the client to review each palette and determine which collection is nearing the mark. So together we grab we may grab the colors from this palette or the type from this palette and the buttons from this other palette to form a set of styles that the client and I feel best represent their organization and their vision for the product. Once we have our final palette, I can grab my paintbrush, and I can just begin designing mock-ups with confidence, knowing that the perspectives and the desires of others, that they've set the course. All right. Okay. Finally, we're at the design phase. So how do we as designers sketch and build and specify the design with people at the center? First and foremost, we invite people in. And I'll tell you, I struggled with this for years. When I would design, I was like a train, just headed into a long tunnel. I'd enter just a dark tunnel of deep work for about 2 weeks, and then I'd emerge on the other side with a handful of like nearly finished mock-ups. But here's the thing: I preferred the tunnel because I didn't want anyone to see my work until it was finished. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't up to my standard of quality. I was afraid to share it. What would others think of me and think of me as a designer? I was guarding my reputation instead of inviting others to help me refine it. I was more concerned about me and less about them. And let me tell you, designer, let people in. Your work is unfinished. It's ugly because it's going to be until it's done. No one looks at a big hole in the ground at a construction site and says, oh man, that engineer has no idea what they're doing. In fact, the wise engineer says, hey, can you take a look at this hole and make sure it's right? People are going to depend on the building that goes here, and I don't want it to collapse. We have to die to our pride. That chain inside of us that tethers us to our work, our work and our identity as one. It's got to be torn apart. You are not your design. That is an empty existence. You are a person, and there are other people just like you who stand to benefit from your talents. So use them for their sake, not just your own. Now, how can we do that practically? We do that by holding frequent critiques with fellow designers. Don't wait until it's all finished. The moment you have a rough concept, share it with your team. Invite them to review it with a critical eye. Share your progress with the client. That's right. Even when it's half-baked, even if it's quarter-baked, if you're feeling unsure about a decision you've made, look to them for their affirmation. I guarantee you, the right clients will appreciate it. They'll be more invested because of it. And then share the design with your engineers too, as early as possible. Do not wait until it's 100% complete and ready for development. Rory was talking about this with the goal of UXDX in the beginning. This is a dismantling of the waterfall. Your design is not 100% complete until it's developed. You can't design a website in Figma and call it a website because it's not on the web. I mean, do you want people to be at the center of your design? Then man, we got to invite people in to make decisions with you. All right, last one. Final phase of the Pixo design process is develop. And when I say develop, I mean that our engineers have assumed the bulk of the work at this point. So the designers are slowly, they're kind of slowing down and creating new things. Wireframes are done, visual designs are done, and it's transitioning more to a role of reviewer. So how do we maintain an others mindset in the final leg of the process? First, we partner with our engineers. We must remain engaged with our engineers as they turn the design into a real working product. It's our tendency as designers to do what Dan Mall refers to as the dead drop. And so that is, we package up our design files, we huck them over the wall to our engineers, and we just hope for the best, right? Maybe you've done that before. So we need to schedule regular collaboration sessions where you and your engineers are combing through the working product together. Get familiar with the code yourself and speak in their language. Don't abandon them. Be in it with them. And then finally, now that we have a partially working product, we have to invite future users to test it. Go back to those audience members you first interviewed and see what they think. Conduct your user tests. See what's working and what's not working from their perspective. Let them critique it and refine it. Because remember, it's ultimately for them, right? All right. We can catch our breath here for a second. I imagine that's a lot to take in. It's a lot, and it requires a great deal of hard work too. This isn't a new tool or a technique to implement. This is a work of personal transformation. This is a rewiring and an unlearning. But I promise you, it's worth it. And listen, I'm not saying this from the summit. I not achieve this in full. I am not the divine, humble designer here. Not at all. I'm at the base here, hoping to change along with you. And I'll end this time with a quote from one of my favorite writers. This is St. Augustine of Hippo. When defining the nature of humility, he gave us this charge: do you wish to rise? Begin by descending. You plan a tower that will pierce the clouds. Lay first the foundation of humility. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. Again, my name is Tyler Edwards. You can reach out to Pixo or to me on LinkedIn, or head over to our website at pixotech.com. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Tyler. So, yeah, I didn't answer all A's when you gave me the test. So I have some work to do on my humility. Now,
we all do.
I find, and it's going to be my first question, is I know the concept of early and often sharing and the value, and I know the feeling of, but this is crap right now, and there's no point sharing it because it doesn't get across what I'm trying to get across. So how do you, like, I know you're saying share it, but I'm always kind of still saying, oh, well, I'll just do a little bit more because it's so crap now that, like, I have to get it a little bit better before I share it. What's your tips for people like me?
That's a good question. Certainly immerse yourself. Like, just do it is one thing. Like, break the tension of that feeling of like, this needs to be perfect before someone, especially even the client, sees it. But I know this is another thing. I'll reference Dan Mall again. He talks about this in a talk in a book a while ago, where he talks about the importance of building ugly. And so we don't even just call our early designs and our early progress ugly. We actually try and keep it as low fidelity as possible for a while. And so the things that we need to grow in that way is speaking more conceptually than we are just trying to refine everything in the beginning. And then also growing in the way that we communicate that to our clients. How do we actually talk about the work? How do we talk about the vision of the work and the future of the work? And so, how can we actually communicate more effectively to people on our team, to our clients, that what you see here that are just a couple of circles and some squares and some scribbles and whatnot, where are you heading with that? Another thing is making small decisions more frequently. And so instead of waiting until the big pixel perfect composition is finished, which that's a thing we have to do away with to begin with, making small decisions on small things. And so we're still very much prescribers of atomic design. Brad Frost's atomic design where we want to make these kind of micro decisions along the way. And that's one thing, in the process we're talking about doing design palettes where we're making small decisions on just simply type and color and button styles, like 3 very simple but foundational things. And when we get a resounding yes on that in collaboration with the client, then we can very simply move on to something a bit more in context. We've got real content that's starting to come in. Maybe we're building out some small components, maybe a certain page type. And I'm talking about a website here. And since we've already approved these styles and we're just simply painting with them, it's a lot easier to get a vision for. And I'd also say just do away with the language of like, okay, but it's not done yet. We've got a little bit more to go. It's a little ugly right now. Like, don't be afraid of it. Just be confident in where it's at.
Excellent. Just seeing there's a comment from Timothy saying, thanks for sharing, learned a lot from your explanation. So
to be sure, I think that was for Wilma earlier. So
was it?
Make sure she gets proper props for that. Yeah, but
apologies, timing wise.
Thank you so much for saying that.
it was for Wilma. Apologies. You touched on a point there that I want to dig deeper into. So you mentioned ugly like wireframes versus kind of the fidelity. And how do you deal with, because I've seen both sides of this. You show a wireframe to a client and they're like, what the hell am I paying you for? This is kind of pen on paper. And they can lose track on, like, because a wireframe is supposed to not lose track on the look and feel, but people do because it looks so basic, versus the other side where it's almost pixel perfect. And then they're saying, oh, well, no, they're nitpicking at the wrong things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And I've been in that situation so many times. I think the key aspect there is being very clear about what we need to walk away with from this time in collaboration with the client. And so if we're looking at wireframes, we make very clear, this is not the design. This is not like the front end. This is not the visual design. What we need decisions on today are, the hierarchy of content, where things are existing on a particular page or screen or something. Like, be as clear as possible about what is the thing that we are trying to accomplish when we look at this right now. And then hopefully that, that creates more of a tunnel vision for, oh, I'm not as concerned about all those things I'm already thinking about, because it's so easy when you see something that's unfinished, especially a client who's not always in the same space and thinking in the same way that we can, visualizing ahead. It's really easy to think like you said, like, what am I paying for? Like these are just, boxes with like, Comic Sans. And I don't know if anyone's using Comic Sans for wireframes. Maybe don't. Or maybe
Balsamic, I think that's the default font on Balsamic.
Oh, I love it. Beautiful. But yeah, just terribly clear about what the goal of that time is. And that's true for visual design as well. When we move on from wireframes and we have visual design that isn't quite there when it comes to that high fidelity definition, all the styles are here yet. It's, listen here, we're focusing in on this particular component. We want to make sure that it's applying the styles that we've already agreed on from our design palettes. And it's being applied correctly to the way that the content exists. And so, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that's actually brought us up to exactly time. So we're out of time for today, but thank you very much for that. I really enjoyed the presentation, and it felt a little uncomfortable because it felt like you were talking a bit too closely to me personally as you were going through some of the examples. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's what we have time for today. But if you did enjoy it, please follow us on LinkedIn, where we'll be announcing all of the future sessions coming up, and you can watch all of these sessions live. Also follow us on Twitter, or jump into the Slack community where you can ask some more questions and follow up afterwards. But if you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. So thank you very much to both Tyler and to Wilma for sharing their stories and their experience. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.